The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there he stood. Daniel, the man who had destroyed 15 years of my life. His expensive suits were gone. The luxury watch he'd once loved to flash had disappeared. His hair was messy. His eyes were bloodshot. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. He swallowed hard. I have nowhere else to go. I stared at him. The same man who had smiled while packing his bags. The same man who told me, "You're too boring. She makes me feel alive." The same man who introduced his 26-year-old girlfriend to our children before our divorce papers were even finalized. Now, he was standing on my porch carrying one worn-out duffel bag. I lost everything. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I asked one question. "Where is she?" His face turned white, and that single expression told me everything. He had finally learned. Some betrayals cost far more than a marriage. Chapter 1. The life I thought was perfect. Before my life fell apart, I honestly believed I was one of the lucky ones. My name is Emily, and at 48 years old, I thought I had everything that truly mattered. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 15 years. We had built a comfortable home in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other. We had 2 wonderful children who filled our house with laughter, arguments over homework, and dreams about the future. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was ours, and I loved every ordinary moment of it. Daniel worked in finance and had built a successful career. His job demanded long hours, but I never complained because I believed we were working toward the same goals. Years earlier, I had given up a promising career of my own to stay home and raise our children. It wasn't a sacrifice I regretted. Watching our family grow felt more important than any promotion or paycheck. I trusted Daniel completely. I never checked his phone. I never questioned where he was. I believed trust was the foundation of a happy marriage, and I was proud that we had it. Then, little things began to change. At first, they seemed harmless. He started coming home later than usual, always blaming unexpected meetings or difficult clients. His phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, never left his hand. It buzzed constantly, and he'd smile at the screen before quickly locking it whenever I walked into the room. He bought an expensive new cologne he'd never worn before. Suddenly, he became obsessed with going to the gym, replacing quiet evenings with family for hours spent getting back in shape. Weekend work trips became more frequent, and every explanation sounded reasonable enough that I pushed my doubts aside. Deep down, my instincts whispered that something wasn't right. But love has a strange way of convincing you to ignore the truth. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You make excuses for the person you trust most because accepting the alternative feels impossible. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs weren't small at all. I simply wasn't ready to see them. Chapter 2. The woman who stole my husband. The truth didn't come crashing into my life with a dramatic confession. It arrived quietly, hidden inside a series of text messages I was never supposed to see. One Saturday morning, Daniel left his phone on the kitchen island while he rushed upstairs to shower before another important meeting. His screen lit up with a message, and before I could even stop myself, my eyes caught the preview. "I already miss you. Last night was perfect." My heart stopped. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen, hoping there had to be another explanation. There wasn't. My hands trembled as I unlocked his phone using the passcode I'd known for years. What I found shattered 15 years of marriage in less than 5 minutes. Hundreds of messages, photos, plans for weekends they had spent together while he told me he was traveling for work. "I love you. I can't wait until the divorce is over. We'll finally have our life together." The affair hadn't started recently. It had been going on for nearly a year. The other woman was everything I feared she would be: young, beautiful, confident, and one of Daniel's co-workers. She knew he was married. She knew we had children. None of it seemed to matter. When Daniel came downstairs, I was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone lying between us. He looked at the screen, then at me. There wasn't a trace of panic on his face, only relief, as if he was tired of hiding. "How long?" I whispered. He didn't deny a single word. Instead, he took a deep breath and said the sentence that would echo in my mind for years. "I deserve to be happy." Then came the excuses. He said I'd changed, that I cared more about the children than I cared about him, that our marriage had become routine, that life with me felt predictable and boring. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he admit that the affair was his choice. By that evening, he had packed 2 suitcases and walked out the front door. Our children stood silently in the hallway, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their father load his bags into his car. He didn't look back. He simply drove away, leaving the life we had built together in his rearview mirror. Chapter 3. Humiliated in front of everyone. The hardest part wasn't discovering that my husband had cheated. It was realizing how many people already knew. The whispers started almost immediately. Friends we'd shared dinners with for years suddenly stopped returning my calls. Couples who had once invited us to backyard barbecues somehow became too busy whenever I reached out. A few kind friends stayed by my side, but others quietly drifted toward Daniel, convinced there had to be 2 sides to every story. Then came the conversations I never should have had. One afternoon, an old neighbor awkwardly admitted she'd seen Daniel having dinner with another woman months before I found out. She thought I already knew. Another family friend confessed they had seen them holding hands at a charity event. One of Daniel's co-workers later told me the affair had become an open secret around the office. People whispered about it in break rooms. They laughed together at company parties. Some even assumed our marriage had already ended because Daniel spoke about me as if I barely existed. No one warned me. I was the last person to learn the truth about my own marriage. That betrayal hurt almost as much as Daniel's. Then, social media became its own form of torture. Every time I opened my phone, there they were. Photos from tropical beaches, weekend trips to expensive resorts, romantic dinners with candlelight and champagne. Daniel smiled in every picture the same way he used to smile at me. His arm rested around her waist as if she'd always belonged there. The comments beneath the photos were even worse. "You two are relationship goals. So happy you found each other. Beautiful couple." People celebrated the very relationship that had destroyed my family. Then one evening, I saw something that nearly made me drop my phone. His girlfriend had posted a close-up selfie. Around her neck hung a diamond pendant, the one I had received from Daniel on our 10th wedding anniversary. A week later, she posted another picture wearing the pearl earrings my mother had given me before she passed away. Earrings Daniel had promised were safely packed away while we divided our belongings. He hadn't just replaced me, he had handed pieces of my life to the woman he left me for. It felt as though every memory we had built together had been donated to someone else. Meanwhile, Daniel didn't hide his new relationship. He flaunted it. He arrived at restaurants where we used to celebrate anniversaries. He attended charity events with her on his arm. He drove a brand new luxury sports car through our old neighborhood as if he wanted everyone to see how much better his life had become. From the outside, he looked happier than ever. People assumed he'd won. The divorce became one final heartbreak. By then, I was emotionally exhausted. Every meeting with attorneys felt like reopening a wound that never had time to heal. Daniel wanted everything settled quickly so he could move on with his new life. I could have fought harder for a larger settlement. My lawyer believed I deserved far more than what Daniel was offering. But I was tired. Tired of arguing, tired of crying, tired of living every day inside a courtroom instead of a home. So I signed the papers, not because it was fair, because I wanted peace more than I wanted revenge. When the judge finalized our divorce, 15 years of marriage officially ended in less than 15 minutes. I walked out of the courthouse feeling strangely empty. The woman who entered that building still believed she was someone's wife. The woman who walked out was starting over from nothing. At home, I allowed myself to cry, sometimes late at night after the children had gone to bed, sometimes in the shower where no one could hear me, sometimes sitting alone in my car before driving home. But never in front of my children. They had already lost enough. I refused to let them lose the mother they still needed. Chapter 4. Rebuilding from nothing. The first year after the divorce was the hardest year of my life. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. I had spent years building a life around my family, and suddenly I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me in the bathroom mirror. I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was grieving the future I thought we would have, the retirement we'd planned, the vacations we had promised ourselves, the grandchildren we imagined spoiling together someday. All of it disappeared the moment Daniel chose someone else. But life doesn't stop because your heart is broken. Bills still arrive. Children still need school supplies. The mortgage still has to be paid. So I did what I had to do. I started over. After spending so many years away from the workforce, returning wasn't easy. Technology had changed. Industries had evolved. The confidence I once had seemed to disappear somewhere between raising children and trying to save a failing marriage. I updated my resume countless times before I had the courage to send it anywhere. Most employers never replied. Some interviews ended with polite smiles that translated into, "We're looking for someone with more recent experience." Every rejection stung. Still, I kept applying. Eventually, a small accounting firm gave me a chance. The salary wasn't impressive. The position was entry-level compared to where my career had once been. But it was a beginning. Every evening after work, I took online courses to refresh skills I hadn't used in years. I learned new software, studied industry updates, and stayed awake long after midnight trying to catch up with a world that had moved forward without me. When one paycheck wasn't enough, I found freelance bookkeeping work on weekends. Some nights I barely slept 4 hours. I worried constantly about money. Every grocery trip became a math problem. Every unexpected expense felt like a disaster waiting to happen. There were weeks when I skipped buying new clothes so the children wouldn't have to give up their extracurricular activities. I never wanted them to feel responsible for the choices their father had made. Even so, they noticed. My son quietly started working part-time after school. My daughter insisted on applying for scholarships before I even suggested it. Neither of them complained. Instead, they reminded me every day that we were still a family. Just a smaller one. Little by little. Things began to change. I earned a promotion, then another. The freelance clients increased. The debts slowly shrank. After years of saving every extra dollar, I sold the old house that held too many painful memories and bought a modest little home across town. It wasn't impressive. There was no grand staircase, no oversized kitchen, no expensive landscaping. The bedrooms were smaller. The backyard was tiny. The furniture didn't match. But the house was filled with something our old home had lost long before Daniel left. Peace, no lies, no secrets, no pretending everything was okay. For the first time in years, I woke up without wondering who my husband was texting. I drank my morning coffee on the porch listening to birds instead of arguments. I laughed more, I slept better. And somewhere along the way, I realized something that surprised even me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. For years, I believed Daniel had been the center of my happiness. Now, I understood the truth. He had never been the source of it. I was. Chapter 5. The perfect life begins to crack. While I was quietly rebuilding my life, Daniel seemed to be living the dream he'd chosen over our family. At least, that's what everyone believed. His social media painted the picture of a man who had no regrets. Every few weeks, There were new photos from another exotic destination: Italy, Greece, the Maldives, private yachts, luxury hotels, five-star restaurants overlooking crystal blue water. He traded in his old sedan for a sleek imported sports car that looked more expensive than my entire house. Designer suits replaced the clothes he'd worn during our marriage. Luxury watches appeared on his wrist. Champagne flowed at rooftop parties filled with people who smiled for cameras and called themselves friends. His girlfriends seemed to enjoy documenting every glamorous moment of their lives. From the outside, it looked like Daniel had won. Meanwhile, I was working overtime, clipping grocery coupons, and celebrating whenever I found discounted school supplies. Sometimes I questioned everything. Had honesty really been worth it? Had loyalty been a mistake? For a brief moment, I wondered if people who betrayed others truly did end up happier. But pictures only tell the story someone wants the world to see. Behind those carefully filtered smiles, everything was beginning to fall apart. The woman Daniel had left me for loved, expensive things: designer handbags, luxury vacations, fine jewelry, exclusive restaurants. She spent money almost as quickly as it entered their bank account. Daniel, desperate to maintain the image of success, kept saying yes. To keep up with their lifestyle, he started making increasingly risky investments. At first, he made a few lucky profits. That only made him more confident. Soon, he was borrowing money, gambling on high-risk financial deals, and chasing bigger returns. When the market shifted, everything unraveled. The profits disappeared, the losses multiplied, credit card balances exploded, loans became impossible to repay. The pressure followed him everywhere. Then came the investigation. Rumors spread through his company that certain financial transactions didn't add up. Auditors began reviewing records. Executives started asking difficult questions. Meetings behind closed doors became more frequent. Daniel insisted everything was fine, but people noticed the cracks. He became short-tempered. He stopped smiling in photographs. His luxurious vacations suddenly became less frequent. The expensive dinners disappeared. Even his online posts slowed down. The man who once believed he had escaped an ordinary marriage for an extraordinary life was discovering a painful truth. A life built on lies eventually demands payment, and the bill was finally coming due. Chapter 6. Karma doesn't arrive loudly. People always imagine karma arriving with dramatic headlines, a public scandal, a spectacular downfall, a single moment when everyone finally sees justice. But that's not how it happened to Daniel. His life didn't collapse overnight. It unraveled quietly, one bad decision at a time. I only learned the details months later through mutual friends and bits of gossip that somehow always found their way back to me. At first, his relationship with the woman he had left me for began to change. The vacations became less frequent. The expensive gifts became smaller. Arguments that had once been hidden behind perfect social media photos started spilling into public places. People overheard shouting matches in restaurants. Neighbors heard screaming through the walls of their luxury home. Friends noticed they no longer looked like the couple everyone envied. Money had always been the glue holding their relationship together, and that glue was beginning to dissolve. Daniel was drowning in debt, though few people knew how serious it had become. He borrowed against investments that no longer existed. He refinanced properties to cover losses from failed financial deals. Creditors started calling every day. Collection notices piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. Still, he kept pretending everything was under control, because admitting failure would have meant admitting that he had destroyed his family for a fantasy. Then, one morning, he woke up to discover that fantasy had packed its bags. His girlfriend was gone. So were several expensive suitcases. So was the jewelry. And so was a shocking amount of money. She hadn't simply left. She had emptied their joint bank accounts first. Savings, checking, investment funds she legally had access to. She transferred everything she could before disappearing without warning. By the time Daniel realized what had happened, she had already boarded a flight with another man. A wealthier man, someone who could offer an even more luxurious lifestyle. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman Daniel believed was his soulmate had left him the exact same way he had once left me. Without remorse, without explanation, without looking back. Friends later told me she posted photos from Europe just weeks later. Different country, different millionaire, same smile. The same smile she'd once promised would belong only to Daniel forever. I wish I could tell you I celebrated. I didn't. I simply stared at the pictures for a long time before closing my phone. Because betrayal isn't entertaining when you've lived through it, not even when the betrayer becomes the betrayed. Then, everything else started falling apart. The investigation at Daniel's company reached its conclusion. He wasn't arrested, but the damage to his reputation was enough. His employer terminated him immediately, after years of climbing the corporate ladder. His executive office was cleared out in a single afternoon. Security escorted him from the building he'd proudly entered every morning for over a decade. News travels fast in the financial world. Finding another executive position became nearly impossible. No one wanted to hire someone carrying that kind of professional baggage. Without his six-figure salary, the bills he'd been ignoring became impossible to manage. The mortgage fell behind. The luxury house he'd proudly shown off online was eventually repossessed by the bank. The sleek sports car disappeared from his driveway one morning after a repossession company arrived before sunrise. The second luxury vehicle followed a few weeks later. Designer suits were sold, expensive watches vanished, furniture disappeared piece by piece, and everything that had once made him look successful slowly slipped away. Then came something even harder to replace. People. The friends who loved expensive parties suddenly stopped calling. Weekend invitations disappeared. Business associates became strangers overnight. People who once praised him now pretended not to recognize him in public. Even some members of his own family grew distant. The relatives who had criticized me after the divorce suddenly found excuses whenever Daniel asked for help. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages remained unread. Holiday invitations stopped arriving. For the first time in his life, Daniel discovered the difference between people who love you and people who simply enjoy what you can provide. By the time he understood that lesson, there was almost nothing left to lose. He finally realized something I had understood long before. People who are attracted to your money usually disappear the moment the money does. Chapter 7. The Man at My Door. The knock came just after midnight. 3 slow, hesitant knocks. I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined them when they came again. I wasn't expecting visitors, certainly not at that hour. When I opened the front door, there he stood. Daniel. For a moment, I barely recognized him. The confident executive who had walked out of our marriage years earlier was gone. His tailored suits had been replaced by faded jeans and a wrinkled jacket. His expensive leather shoes looked worn. His hair, once perfectly styled, had grown uneven and streaked with gray. Dark circles surrounded tired eyes that no longer carried the confidence I remembered. Instead of luggage for a luxury vacation, he carried one old duffel bag. "I have nowhere else to go," he said quietly. I stared at him without speaking. This was the same man who had once smiled while packing his belongings. The same man who told me another woman made him feel alive. The same man who drove away without looking back while our children cried in the doorway. Now, life had brought him back to the porch he'd once abandoned. "I lost everything," he whispered. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Where is she?" His eyes dropped to the ground. "She left." "I know. She took everything." "I know. I didn't think she'd—" His voice cracked. "I know." Silence settled between us. Then he looked up with tears in his eyes. "Emily, I made the biggest mistake of my life." He said he'd never stopped loving me. He said he thought the excitement would last forever, but eventually realized what he had thrown away. He said he missed family dinners, missed hearing the children laugh, missed quiet Sunday mornings, missed our home, missed me. He apologized over and over. "I was manipulated," he said. "She knew exactly what to say. I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't even recognize the man I became. I listened without interrupting. Years ago, hearing those words would have shattered me. Now, they simply sounded familiar. Because as he spoke, I noticed something that hadn't changed at all. He still wasn't accepting responsibility. Every sentence contained another excuse. The affair partner manipulated him. Work pressured him. Midlife confusion clouded his judgment. Stress affected his decisions. Everything and everyone except himself. Not once did he simply say, "I chose this." Not once did he admit that every lie, every betrayal, every broken promise had been entirely his own decision. He wanted forgiveness, but he still hadn't found honesty. And without honesty, an apology is nothing more than another performance. Chapter 8. The apology he didn't expect. Daniel probably expected me to scream, to slam the door in his face, to remind him of every cruel thing he'd ever done years earlier. That's exactly what I might have done. But pain changes you. Time changes you. Healing changes you even more. So instead of shouting, I invited him to sit on the porch, not inside the house. That part of my life was no longer his. We sat in silence for several moments. The night air was cool. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Then I looked at the man I had once planned to grow old with. "I've already forgiven you," I said. Hope immediately appeared in his eyes. Too soon. Because I wasn't finished. "I just don't think you understand what you actually destroyed." His smile disappeared. "You remember the day you left?" He nodded. "You remember driving away?" Another nod. "I remember what happened after that." I spoke quietly, not with anger, not with bitterness, simply with truth. "You missed Ethan's 16th birthday because you were in Hawaii." His eyes dropped. "You missed Lily's first piano recital because you said you were too busy." Silence. "You weren't there when Ethan got suspended from school after getting into a fight because another student called me pathetic." He swallowed hard. "You weren't there the night Lily had her first panic attack and kept asking what she'd done wrong to make her father leave." Tears formed in his eyes. I continued. "I was." I sat beside her hospital bed. I held her hand. I told her over and over that none of this was her fault. I paid every medical bill. I worked late every night. I learned how to fix broken appliances because there was no one else. I stayed awake wondering whether I had enough money for groceries. I smiled through every school graduation. I celebrated every holiday. I wrapped every Christmas present. I signed every permission slip. I comforted every nightmare. You weren't just absent from my life, Daniel. You were absent from theirs." His shoulders began to shake. For the first time since he'd arrived. He wasn't trying to defend himself. He wasn't offering explanations. He wasn't blaming anyone else. I wasn't finished. "Do you know what hurt the most?" He slowly shook his head. "It wasn't that you fell in love with someone else. It was that you made us feel like we were disposable. You convinced yourself that your happiness mattered more than the family who loved you. You didn't lose us because of one affair. You lost us because every single day afterward, you kept choosing not to come back." The tears he'd been holding back finally fell. He covered his face with both hands. A broken sob escaped his lips. "I am so sorry," he whispered. "I know," I replied softly. "And you'll spend the rest of your life wishing those words had come before you walked out that door." Sometimes people think revenge is watching someone suffer. They imagine justice as anger, shouting, or humiliation. But I've learned something different. Sometimes, the most painful punishment isn't revenge at all. It's forcing someone to sit quietly and face the truth they've spent years running from. That night, Daniel finally stopped crying for what he had lost. He started crying for what he had destroyed, and those are two very different kinds of tears. Chapter 9. The children make their choice. I didn't tell our children about Daniel's visit right away. Not because I wanted to protect him, because I wanted to protect them. For years, they had worked hard to heal, and I wasn't about to drag them back into old wounds unless they chose to face them. But secrets have a way of finding daylight. A week after Daniel showed up at my door, my son, Ethan, noticed the bouquet of flowers sitting on my kitchen counter. "Who are those from?" he asked. I hesitated for only a second. "Your father." The room fell silent. My daughter, Lily, slowly lowered the coffee mug she had been holding. "He came here," she asked quietly. I nodded. "What did he want?" I told them everything. How he had lost his job, how the woman he'd left us for had abandoned him, how he apologized, how he said he wanted his family back. Neither of them interrupted. They simply listened. Finally, Ethan looked out the window and said, "He doesn't get to come back just because life stopped being easy." Lily looked down at the table. "I spent years wondering what was wrong with me," she whispered. "I kept thinking, if I'd been a better daughter, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." My heart broke all over again. I reached for her hand. "You were never the reason." "I know that now," she said, "but 12-year-old me didn't." A few days later, Daniel called. Not to ask about me, to ask if the children would meet him. I told them the decision was entirely theirs. To my surprise, they agreed, not because they were ready to forgive him, because they needed answers. We met at a quiet cafe halfway across town. Daniel stood as they walked in, tears already filling his eyes. "They're so grown up," he whispered. Neither of them hugged him. They simply sat down across from him. After a long silence, Daniel said, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," Ethan answered calmly. "You don't." Daniel flinched. "I made terrible mistakes." "You did," Lily said. "But let's stop calling them mistakes. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. You didn't accidentally cheat on Mom for a year. You didn't accidentally leave us. You made choices." Every word landed like a stone. Ethan leaned forward. "You think cheating on Mom is why we're angry? It's part of it. But that's not what destroyed us. You abandoned your family. You left me. You left Lily. You stopped showing up. You missed birthdays, graduations, baseball games, Grandpa's funeral, and the nights Lily needed you most. You weren't there when Mom cried herself to sleep because she thought she'd failed us." Daniel covered his mouth as tears rolled down his face. Lily spoke softly. "The first Father's Day after you left. I made you a card anyway. I kept hoping you'd call. You never did. I threw the card away that night." Daniel closed his eyes. "I didn't know." "No," she replied, "because you never asked." Silence settled over the table. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I wish I could go back." "So do we," Ethan answered, "but not because we want you back, because we wish we'd had the father we deserved." For the first time, there were no excuses. No blaming the affair, no blaming work, no blaming a midlife crisis. Just heavy, painful, honest silence. Daniel finally understood that his betrayal hadn't ended with his marriage. It had echoed into the lives of his children, shaping the way they trusted people, viewed love, and feared abandonment. Affairs don't only break hearts. They leave scars on generations. As we stood to leave, Daniel quietly said, "I don't expect forgiveness anymore." Ethan nodded. "That's probably the first honest thing you've said today." Then the two of them walked away beside me. Not because I asked them to, because they had already made their choice. We were still a family, just not the one Daniel had left behind. Chapter 10. Losing me was his greatest loss. After that meeting, life settled into a new rhythm. Daniel didn't disappear. Every few weeks, another letter arrived in my mailbox. Some were only a page long, others filled several envelopes. He wrote about his regrets, the memories he couldn't escape, the family dinners he replayed in his mind, the ordinary moments he had once taken for granted. Sometimes flowers appeared on my porch, never extravagant bouquets, just simple arrangements with handwritten notes. I'm sorry. I finally understand. Thank you for listening. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness anymore. He was simply trying to become a better man. Years too late. I read every letter. Not because I was considering taking him back, but because I could see something had finally changed for the first time in his life. He had stopped blaming everyone else. He wrote, I chose my own selfishness. He wrote, no one manipulated me. He wrote, I destroyed my family one decision at a time. Those were words I had waited years to hear. Ironically, by the time he finally said them, I no longer needed them. One afternoon, he asked if we could meet one last time. We sat on a park bench overlooking a quiet lake where ducks drifted across the water. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply felt complete. Daniel looked older, not just in appearance, in spirit. I don't expect another chance, he said. I just wanted to tell you something. I waited. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I was too blind to see it. I smiled gently. I know. He looked surprised. You know, I've known for a long time. I reached into my bag and handed him every letter he had written. I've read everyone. You have. I nodded. They mattered. Hope slowly returned to his face. Then I spoke the words that would end our story forever. Daniel, I forgave you a long time ago. His eyes filled with tears. For a brief second, I saw hope. The hope that maybe forgiveness meant another beginning. Then I finished. But forgiveness doesn't mean I want you back. His shoulders sank. I'll always be grateful for the years when we were happy. I'll always appreciate that we brought two incredible children into this world. And strangely enough, I even thank you for leaving. He stared at me in disbelief. If you hadn't, I never would have discovered how strong I really was. I would have spent the rest of my life believing my happiness depended on someone else's love. But losing you forced me to find myself. And the woman I found, she smiled, deserves better than the man who walked away. A tear rolled down his cheek. I understand. I hope you do. I stood. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't beg. He simply nodded. As I walked away, I heard him quietly say, I'm sorry. I didn't turn around. Not because I was angry, not because I hated him, but because that chapter of my life had already ended. Months passed. The children and I began traveling together. We explored places we'd always dreamed about visiting, but never had the chance to see. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost during the years my marriage consumed my world. I laughed more than I had in decades. One afternoon, while volunteering at a community literacy program, I met someone. His name was Michael. He wasn't flashy. He didn't make grand promises. He didn't try to rescue me. He simply treated me with kindness. He listened when I spoke. He respected my boundaries. He made me laugh until my stomach hurt. For the first time, I understood what real love felt like, not because someone completed me, but because I had already become whole on my own. Whether that relationship lasted forever wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that I no longer feared being alone, because I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Happiness isn't something another person gives you. It's something you build within yourself. Looking back now, people sometimes ask if I believe Daniel got what he deserved. I never know how to answer. Because life has a way of teaching lessons no courtroom ever can. The woman he chose over his family left him. His career disappeared. His wealth vanished. His friends walked away. But none of those losses compared to the one that haunted him most. He lost the people who had loved him before he had anything to offer except his heart. And once that kind of love is broken, no amount of money can ever buy it back. The greatest revenge wasn't watching the man who betrayed me lose everything. It was realizing the only thing he could never get back was me.